Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this broadcast. I think from the people who are on the Zoom call, there are different levels of knowledge and awareness. We're very lucky to have Brent Clark, who's going to lead us through this, what I describe as an owner education activity. Brent's the CEO and founder of energy consultancy Wattblock. They've assisted apartment buildings which house over 70,000 residents with EV charging, solar and efficiency over the last 7 years. Brent's worked in consultation with Tesla, with local government, with 2 universities and 2 state governments. And I note that he's working very closely with the University of New South Wales, who are probably the preeminent university in solar research in Australia. So, Brent, over to you.
Thanks so much. Great to be here to talk about future-proofing your apartment building, the case for EV charging in Strata. We'll go through about 14, 15 slides. I'll then attempt to play a video of a Strata committee member from Melbourne who's done a retrofit, not so much talking about technical tonight. We're just talking about more the need to future-proof the building to accommodate the changes that we're seeing. So I'll also mention a little bit about the New South Wales government, because we've actually done work for the New South Wales government this year, following their big $500 million program to try and incentivize the uptake of EVs here. So let's jump in. What we like to call this is completing the electrification of strata buildings. So to give you an idea, every strata building's got electricity connected to it. The process to complete the electrification of strata buildings involves getting rid of cars that have petrol, getting rid of diesel fire pump systems that have diesel going into them, getting rid of gas hot water systems that have gas going into them, getting rid of gas cooktops and replacing them with induction cooktops to completely electrify the building. And there are these ratings systems for apartment buildings. One's called Green Star. You can't get the top rating if, for example, gas is connected to your apartment building these days. Electric vehicles, EV charging is just part of this gradual process, and we'd like to call it completing the electrification of apartment buildings. And obviously, where possible, putting solar photovoltaic onto the building or using electric heat pumps instead of gas for hot water. Also, batteries going into the apartment buildings. There's an apartment block in Sydney that's had 42 kilowatt hour battery system operating since 2015. For 6 years, we've had batteries installed into apartment blocks. So that's where it fits. A couple of years back, we did a project for the City of Sydney, and that was to look at how do you prepare apartment blocks in the City of Sydney for electric vehicle charging. And we ran a survey across 80 different apartment buildings, and over 700 residents responded to that survey. If you look at some of the results here, 79% of people favoured a user pays charging system. Whatever you do with electric vehicles, be assured no one's going to be getting free electricity to go into the electric vehicles. 78% of people that responded from those 700 were in favour of installing charging systems into their apartment building now. There's a pretty strong desire to be able to do it in your individual lot car space as well. What a lot of people don't know is the nearest public charger. We'll just jump into this. This is really recent in the last month from the Electric Vehicle Council. This is Australian electric vehicle sales. And what we like to say to people is, Australia's not a leader of the pack in anything. And if we think about COVID vaccines in Australia, we're not fast out of the starting blocks, but once the momentum builds, we do adopt quickly. This has been consistent with a whole lot of technologies. If you go back to mobile phones, Australian consumers, they won't be the first out of the pack. Once the momentum gets going, they'll actually adopt at a very fast rate. And just look at the COVID vaccination rates now compared to where we were 3 months ago. And you'll get more penetration of these technologies into Australia just because the really broad middle class that you've got, along with Canada, one of the biggest middle classes of any of the countries around the world. If you think about it, 2 years ago, Australia actually did really well on, the wealthiest index per capita. For that reason, very slow to get started. However, I'll point out one of our team members actually bought one of the first Tesla Model S's back in 2014. There's been a history of electric vehicles being here the last 7 years, and now we're just getting this sharper uptick. This is broken out by battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So the most famous of the PHEVs is the Mitsubishi Outlander in Australia. Really great car. And as I mentioned to some people earlier, it now comes with a vehicle to grid technology, trying to get your building thinking about battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. The first half of this year, more battery electric vehicle sales than in all of last year. These are a couple of photos I took in the last 3 weeks. There are now 31 EV models available in Australia, 58 by the end of 2022. Now, this is in the last 3 weeks in Strata buildings here in Sydney. Here you can see a Mercedes EQC, and here you can see a Hyundai Kona, both in Strata buildings, just emphasizing it's not just Tesla vehicles now. We've seen BMW electric vehicles, Mitsubishi Outlanders. There will be more electric vehicles coming into the Strata buildings very quickly. If we just break it out by brand, these are the different brands that are bringing electric vehicles into Australia. In particular, I'll point out BYD. This is a Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer that Warren Buffett invested in like 10 years ago. And they've now got the lowest cost production battery of any electric vehicle manufacturer. Their Blade battery, it's fantastic. They're going to be bringing 8 models, which are very competitively priced into the Australian market. So a lot of people have thought that electric vehicles were just premium luxury brand. You're going to get a bunch of vehicles coming in that are more affordable. That particular company, it sells plug-in hybrid electric vehicles as well as the battery electric vehicles. And it's basically hitting price parity within its own ranges now with the battery electric vehicles in China. In Australia, people can buy Porsche Taycans, as I showed on the slide before, Mercedes EQCs, Hyundai Ioniqs, Strata in Piedmont. Someone's bought a Mini. As time goes on, this is basically the set of brands and the models by brand that'll be available in Australia by end of 2022. If we look at the car makers that are becoming electric now, the ones that are at the top of the screen here have made a commitment to become 100% electric. Ford is only in Europe, so European Ford models will be 100% electric, but the others globally. If you've got people that buy these brands and want to continue buying these brands, then that's a good reason to start getting the EV charging infrastructure in place. By 2025, these brands down here won't be 100% electric. You'll still be able to get gasoline, but you'll have 30 different Audi models, 23 Hyundai, 24 Renault, and then by 2028 you'll have 70 models from VW. If you like those brands, if you want your building to be able to have owner occupiers and tenants that like driving these brands, now's the time to get started in terms of preparing your building for electric vehicles. Just going around Sydney, here's a bunch of apartment buildings that we've helped prepare the journey to electric vehicle charging. A couple of the very first were Observatory Tower near the Sydney Observatory and Bennelong and Opera Quays. The thinking has been percolating in these buildings for the best part of 4 years now. Bennelong and Opera Quays were actually about to install a bunch of charge stations right before the first COVID lockdown, and then they delayed it. This one over here, Parama Wharf, the chairperson of the Strata was the first person to buy a Tesla Model S in that building. They got policy documents in place for their facilities manager. If we just move on, this one thing that people should be thinking about is if you're an owner in an apartment building, even if you don't want to get an electric vehicle yourself, think about the property valuation uplift on your own individual apartment if, when you want to sell it, you can say that the building's EV ready. Now, just to make this real for you, in Pyrmont, we worked with a building up on Miller Street, and we're helping them. They're at the stage where they've got approval to spend 50 grand, the first 50 grand on EV charging infrastructure. One of the things that helped incent them was they had someone apply to become a tenant in that building that owned a Tesla Model X. And you're thinking, oh, that doesn't really make sense, a car that's $250,000 and someone renting. But think about the person that's got like a nice pad a bit out of the city, and they just want to rent in Pyrmont, stay in the city so they don't have to commute in and out. And it's just their rental pad, for a 3-day working week or something like that. And that person has already turned up to an apartment building in Pyrmont with a Tesla Model X and said, can I charge it in this building? And they were turned away. They said, okay, I can't charge it here. I'm going to go find another place to rent in Pyrmont where I can charge my Tesla Model X. That's a real life example of, how it will affect things moving forward. If we also look at this building called Infinity Cove, if you're ever driving up the Pacific Highway on the left, you'll see this building. The developer of that building thought, oh, I'll try something different. I'll sell off the plan 10 of the apartments in this building with an EV charger in the basement car park. And they were flooded with so many people that wanted to buy off the plan in that building. They increased the number from 10 to 40 apartments in the building being sold off the plan with an EV charge station. And then if you look at other buildings around the city that have made a bit of a feature out of it, Genesis over at Meadowbank has the solar-powered EV charging. The Bircham at Rosebery has solar-powered EV charging. Botanic, which is a build-to-rent just opposite Top Road Shopping Centre, has solar-powered EV charging and an EV that's on car share just for the residents of the building exclusively. A Landmark at St Leonard's, Indigo at Olympic Park, these buildings all coming up being EV ready from day one. There's the example, Richmont's the building on Miller Street that had to turn away the Tesla Model X potential tenant. The other thing just to keep in mind, and this graph is showing you that the public charging is getting better. So here you see in the darker green, the fast DC charging is what you want. And you're seeing that growth in the public charging infrastructure going in. It'll continue to get better. There's at least 5 companies now that are building out bigger networks. So Ampol petrol stations, big project to put EV charging into all the Ampol petrol stations. New entrants coming in from overseas, existing local players, NRMA, all building charge station networks. And so you can comfortably get around the country now on the existing fast chargers. Another thing we should just mention, New South Wales government back in February 2021 did an amendment to the Strata Schemes Management Act, and it's called the Sustainability Infrastructure Amendment. And one of the items that triggers, this provision in the Strata Schemes Act is any technology that facilitates the use of sustainable forms of transport, such as EV chargers. So what the New South Wales government did in February was they lowered the threshold of votes you need in a strata scheme to get an EV charging project across the line. So prior to February, you would have needed a special resolution, which is at like a 75% threshold. And then the New South Wales government actually lowered that threshold to 50%. Now, that's not 50% of all owners. That's 50% of the owners that care to vote either in person or via proxy. Think back to your last AGM, how many people actually turned up? It's just those people in the room. It's a 50% threshold knockout between those people. Abstaining is not a no vote. That little bit easier, trying to give a little bit of a kick to strata buildings. That also extends to the method of financing. So, if you wanted to have a vote to take out a strata loan to pay for an EV charging infrastructure, then that would also trigger this new amendment, and you'd only need that lower threshold. It is on a unit entitlements basis, though. So if you've got a mix of different sized apartments, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, or studio, it's counted on the unit entitlements of those in favour and those against. Now, just on to the New South Wales government. So they've put $500 million towards their EV strategy, removing stamp duty and giving a limited $3,000 rebate on vehicles under $68,750. I think it's for the first 25,000 vehicles. They're putting $171 million co-funding into infrastructure for EV charging. They'll be moving the bus and government fleets to electric vehicles. Look, there's been some talk about electric vehicle owners. You're not paying your fuel excise through buying petrol at the pump. There's been some talk about electric vehicles being taxed. Well, the New South Wales government is delaying road user charges until 2027 or until electric vehicles account for 30% of sales, up from 1.8% or whatever we are at the moment. That is a real project. We've done real work paid for by the government to try and help better prepare buildings and apartment buildings for EV charging. It's real. Like, the New South Wales government is behind this. They've got a leadership position compared to all the other state governments who are now trying to catch up with what New South Wales is doing on electric vehicles. The two tipping points for electric vehicles with the EV manufacturers that are already in the market, it's cheaper to run an electric vehicle than an internal combustion engine vehicle. The next tipping point that is coming up is when it's actually cheaper to buy an electric vehicle than an ICE vehicle. And that's not too far away now. Like, there are different people predicting when it's going to happen. It's probably in about 3 years. It's actually just cheaper to buy an electric vehicle than an ICE vehicle. Here's a case study of an EV charging retrofit from Melbourne at South Bank. So this is one of the largest retrofits in Australia. The whole building is EV ready. So if you're selling on realestate.com.au or Domain, you can market your apartment as being EV ready. They've actually got 22 apartments enabled for EV charging, and that can be done with 12 EV chargers. So remember, in some buildings, they're like, you can have like twin nozzle chargers, so you don't need as many chargers, depending on what technical solution you do as car spaces. I'll try and play a little video clip in a second from a person on the committee. The key point is, after they established that the building was going to go down the path of being EV ready, basically you had a quick jump from 2 electric vehicles to 8 electric vehicles. So that shows there's pent up demand for people to buy. If you make your building EV ready, it actually, that's the thing that is basically the tipping point for that person. In a big apartment block, people are buying new cars every year. Just recently, for World EV Day, I interviewed Danny Tai from a startup company called EV Match, and he's doing customized online reports for people that just show you type in what your alternative ICE vehicle was, and you type in the vehicle that you want to purchase, the electric vehicle, and he does this report and basically crunches all the running costs for you, shows you that you're going to get, when you're getting your return on, at the moment, that extra premium that you pay for the electric vehicle. Let me just switch for a second.
Because it was a journey, and it wasn't just a simple one. It actually started about 5 years ago, but it began in earnest in December 2019, and it finished on Christmas Eve in 2020. We had 22 owners with their car parks made EV ready. We had our first charging sessions going live, the largest retrofitting of a high-rise apartment building in Australia, the market research that we've done along the way with our owners. And when we surveyed them about whether they'd consider buying an EV if charging was available in their car park, that elicited about 25% of owners would buy an EV in the next 2 years. It changed their attitude as to the type of vehicle that they would be buying. Being able to charge their car in their lot, not at a common charging station, was really important. When we started back in 2019, we had 2 electric vehicles, and they were only parked here part-time. EVs and EV charging in apartment buildings can be quite an emotive issue. People somehow confuse electric vehicles with climate change, and suddenly it becomes a very emotive issue. But what you're really doing is enabling those people who buy an EV and live in an apartment to have the same capability to charge their car as someone who lives in a single unit dwelling in the suburbs. Now, when we started, we thought this isn't just a simple way, go out, find some hardware, get it installed. But the more we looked at it, we realised we just had to rethink the whole issue. If we discarded the notion that just contact a supplier and have them install a charger, they were going to just push their own hardware down our throat and come up with their solution. Because retrofitting an apartment building is actually quite complex. So secondly, we then shifted our thinking, and we needed to realise that charging an electric vehicle, it was just like charging a mobile phone. What people want to be able to do is come home, plug their car in, get up in the morning, drive out, come home, plug the car in, drive out, come home. That cycle is just like charging your mobile phone. And therefore, you need a solution that enables that to occur. Spent a lot of time trying to solve, how would we manage it? So finally, we reversed the way of thinking about the problem. So we started with a set of principles that should guide our thinking about how you implement an electric vehicle charging strategy. And key amongst those principles were things like we wanted an open architecture, didn't want to lock people into a specific charger. Secondly, we needed to scrupulously apply the benefit principle so that cost recovery was clear to all owners, because one of the emotive subjects is always about who's paying for it. I'm not getting a benefit. They're getting a benefit. Who pays for the electricity? How can we be certain that the electricity is paid for? So once we solved all of those, so we could apply the benefit principle so that cost recovery was clear to people. Those with an EV would be paying the full cost of what they needed, the hardware, the infrastructure that was needed to connect to them, as well as the electricity. But the owners' corporation should pay for those elements that improve the value to all apartments in the building, because now, this is a building where people can advertise their apartment. You've got EV charging capability. You can make your car park EV ready. From that, we developed a strategy. We addressed firstly the legal issues, then the commercial issues, and finally, we found a technical solution that would meet our requirements instead of finding an engineering solution and then trying to ram that into the building. So ultimately, what have we ended up with? We've now got a capability that all 157 owners can make their car park EV ready if they want to. Everybody will be able to have a charge an electric vehicle. Billing is managed remotely, and so we cost recover all the electricity. And we've got a load management solution that means that these vehicles can all be charged, and the building's own infrastructure is similarly managed. Not only do we have 22 owners that have made their car park EV ready, we've got 12 chargers installed. We've now got 8 electric vehicles in the building, up from the 2 that we had 12 months before. We've got an EV charging strategy, and it's been delivered so that anybody be able to get charging into their own car park if they want it. So that was the journey. Getting started is firstly deciding that you think this is an important thing, this is an important issue, this is an important asset that you should bring into the building, and that all owners will benefit from it. Sorting out the question of the benefits, of who benefits and how costs are recovered, overcomes a lot of the inertia. And I think engaging with your community, flagging and having a communication strategy about this is what we're doing, this is what we're thinking of doing, and doing some market research, engaging with people via surveys. So we ran anonymous surveys that surveyed owners. What were their intentions? How did they feel about it? What were their opinions about electric vehicles? So we flushed out the hot button issues for owners, and then we could address them in a final strategy and then in our policy. So I think that's probably key, working your way through that, not just running out to a supplier and saying, please send equipment. What do you think we should do? Because the supplier will always tell you, buy my equipment.
Okay, so now we're at the formal end of the presentation.